Well, now the rubber meets the road, as they used to say in the commercials. Um, Being an ESL teacher, working with English language learners, or English learners as they're often now referred to, is a lot different now than it was 5 years ago. And here's some of the reasons why. Some of these are not new, but I've basically made a list of 8 issues or facets of the idea of being an advocate. What has changed? One is the immigration issues, both the crackdown on the dreamers, who, if you don't know what that is, I've got a list here I've sent you with this video. DACA, or the dreamers, those that came to the United States with their families when they were very young and could not have known they were committing a crime, or whatever you want to call it, and therefore have grown up their whole life in the United States and then suddenly are in danger of being deported. Well, that if you haven't heard about the dreamers, then you haven't paid any attention to the news. So you may have dreamers in your school. The parents may be dreamers of kids that are in your school. So that's a huge issue. Immigration in general is a huge issue. One of the big things that comes up is when you have an immigration rate at a local plant. And I've given on this list, I've got a bunch of websites, and essentially this is either viewing or reading, in addition to the two chapters that you'll be reading for the first week. Remember, it's summer, there's a lot to do in a class. So we're doing 16 weeks in about 5 weeks in this class. So, all right, so the first one is immigration. That's dramatically changed. It will affect you because you can't pretend that it doesn't affect you. It affects your students, it affects you. It affects your parents. Number 2, incidents of intimidation, bullying, or anti-immigrant rhetoric in your school. I've got examples here from sports incidents involving Lexington athletes at another school, Lexington, Nebraska. Lincoln Public Schools superintendent talks about this in an article. And so that's another idea. Now, I also even include in here that people are still attacking the Irish in Kansas City. Yeah, it's true. And by the way, if you didn't know it, if you taught in Massachusetts, there are many Irish who are in the United States undocumented, and they're being picked up. So it's not just people of color, or however you want to divide that. So that's related to immigration. Number 3, misconceptions about English language learners. This has always kind of been a problem. And one of the facets of being an advocate is people think because they don't speak English, they must not be very smart, or they must not be educated, as if speaking English was a sign of great education. And that's not true. I've had students who are brilliant that didn't speak English, but spoke Spanish and could go to college in a Spanish-speaking country, no problem. And that also includes students being sent into, and follows on number 4, the facet. People used to be that people would send English language learners, into SPED classes. I've had that happen to me. I'd get a call from some little town. They said they tested them for SPED and they all went in. I said, would you test them in? Well, English. I said, if I went to Turkey, I would be in SPED, okay? That's not a test. It's not legitimate. So some kids, sometimes people are over-identified and sometimes they're under-identified. For example, gifted education. There are a lot of studies that show that Hispanic or kids that don't speak English as a first language are often not included in gifted programs. So that's an issue of testing and so forth. All right, same in math and science. The idea that someone assumes that a certain group is not going to be particularly good at science or math. You've heard of discrimination against women, girls in science and math. Same thing with other groups. So it can be sexist, or it can be, it can be cultural bias. Number 5, some people don't see the home or native language as anything but a barrier or a problem, when in fact, speaking a second language or speaking a first language and learning English is not a problem in itself. And that's something you have to get over the hump. You grimace and say, "Oh, I'm sorry, you have an accent," or "I'm sorry, you don't have the word available." That is not a barrier. It is a challenge, but it doesn't prevent someone from succeeding. So the possibilities for a student to be very successful, you want to remove barriers, and you don't want to create them by your mindset or the mindset of other people. You as a teacher have to advocate to get them the best classes and the most challenging classes. What about communicating with families? That's a 6th one I've included on here. You have to work at that. It doesn't just happen. Sending home a letter that's, even if it's been well translated, is not enough. You may have to do home visits. You may have to set up to have babysitting, or in other words, you may have a parent-teacher conference. You may have to do a little more if the whole family shows up at the school. We'll talk about that in this class. And some of you have done this, so it's not, it's not something unfamiliar to you. A big one, number 7, collaborating with other school staff, creating support for your students or English language learners, helping other teachers work with them, helping other teachers overcome their anxiety and fear or irritation at dealing with students who don't speak English as a first language. This is huge, and I'm sure a lot of you have already done this. I know I've talked to people that are in this class that have done wonderful jobs. In fact, I will be interviewing someone in this class, I guarantee you, to share with everybody, because your people in this class are probably some of the richest resources for the rest of us. Remember that. Include them in your list when you do that resource notebook. People you can call and say, bounce an idea off them, or how do you do this? Principals, how to deal with principals. That's very important. Principals are supposed to be the leaders of educational instruction in the school. Sometimes they don't get to do that, or it doesn't happen, or they don't see that. But you want them to be on the side and supportive of your students. What do you need to do to get them in there? Yeah, you have to kind of suck up to people and be friendly with them. You're doing this in the name of helping your students. Okay, and then the last one I listed, and you may add more to these, is high stakes testing. And the one I hear is when when ESL teachers have ELs in their class, and they show up and they haven't even really learned any English, and they immediately have to take some kind of a state decreed test and fill in the blanks, read the multiple choice, and they have no idea. They're lucky to even fill in the points. They don't know what they're doing. Very frustrating. Teachers have told me. So those are 8 I've listed, and you may have more. But I wanted to do this little introduction to show you that the frontiers, or the aspects of being an advocate for English language learners, is very complicated and getting more complicated because of bureaucratic demands for testing, because of certain attitudes that are coming into the public to be very aggressive and intimidating, because of government crackdowns on immigration. It may frighten students, frighten their parents, may cause them not to show up at school, or see school as a threat. And these are all things you have to deal with. Basically you're the first line of defense for these kids, of support. And you may have to build other people into that. Okay, well, that was just a little introduction, and I just wanted to give that to you, a little piece of my mind. I can spare a few pieces occasionally, and I'll look forward to talking to you again.